that's kind of a bit of an aside in terms of free will, and then how our free. So we have a free will. There are ways that our free will is attenuated, whereas we don't always act with the full volition of our free will to say yes or no. There can be external pressures applied, or internal ones perhaps as well. Ignorance of the actual, like if an object of an action is good or evil, that's hard. That is part of how free will is attenuated. It's kind of a dicey thing in terms of to explain that, because even the church sets an age of reason at age 7. Even like little kids have, or even toddlers have a kind of a good sense of what's good and evil. So ignorance of the law, again, while it follows under free will, or the attenuation of free will, it's not always the best excuse for doing something wrong, to be completely ignorant of what is good or evil. Inadvertence, so if you do something by accident, or like manslaughter would be an attenuation from like conscious murder. Duress, if someone puts an external pressure on you, someone's holding a gun to your head and telling you to do something, to rob a bank. Okay, well, you're under duress. Fear for the future kind of falls under duress as well. You don't want to commit this act, but for fear of exposure or what have you, however that would work out, fear would also be an attenuating habit. When I hear confessions of younger kids or at the high school, I always try to say whatever they're doing, make sure it doesn't become a habit. Not that you'll never do it again, but be very, very careful. Whatever the sin is, that it not become habitual, because then the next step would be addiction. Habit attenuates free will. Addiction almost attenuates free will almost fully. Scandal, even though it is the bishop told this story at one of our priest gatherings. Scandal in the sense that someone you trust in authority, especially religious authority, may teach you something different or contrary to what the church teaches. The bishop had to correct one of the priests, not that he named him, not that he knew the name either, but he said a parishioner came to him. She said, I confessed artificial contraception. The priest in his council said I could contracept without guilt, and do so freely. Well, that would be a grave scandal. But that would be more so on the soul of the priest who counseled that. Direct contradiction to church teaching. So yeah, and that could actually create what's called invincible ignorance, which I'll get to hopefully by the end of this. So yeah, we're certainly granted a freedom. Oftentimes we're fallible, though. Oftentimes, sometimes that freedom isn't exercised well, or conscience isn't well formed. So again, it's a great gift that our God gives us. Again, with our fallible nature, though, we'll fall short in exercising that. Let's see. Okay, so sources of morality. So there's the object chosen would be, so that's the actual act. I'm going to choose to do A or not do A. And then there might be, I'm going to choose this actual act to intend some result or end in view. In the Catholic teachings, good intentions don't justify an intrinsically evil act. So, let's see. We want to invade a country to spread democracy. Well, that might be a good intention and might be a good result, but that doesn't then make the intrinsically evil action of killing objectively good. Circumstances of action would be the third one that falls under that. So yeah, in this, I talked about this before. So external force or a duress. I want to. My family's going hungry. You know, I had a mother who grew up poor in the Philippines. They robbed the watermelon cart. Sometimes they'd starve to death. Again, it's kind of cutting hairs, but like a lesser act. If should we read this? Yeah, there might be a good result of that, and it seems relatively harmless to maybe steal from the watermelon cart, but it never then changes whether that act is intrinsically, like stealing 8 guinea would be intrinsically evil. Even though force and duress would attenuate the free will and the level of sin. Okay, moral conscience. Okay, and this really speaks to, when we think of conscience, and there is the sense that subjectively we form our mind in terms of choosing to do the good or ill. What it often, though, is what you're trying to kind of, when you have this like visceral feeling in terms of conscious to do the good or feel guilty when you're doing the bad, what that subjective conscience is expressing is an objective in this previews when we talk about natural law. Again, a natural law that's beyond ourselves. It's written by God, put forward by God, expressed fairly well in the Jewish law, and then brought to the natural law brought to its fulfillment in Jesus Christ. And then in his church, we continue to tease out, what's the natural law. In terms of when we talked about Catholic social teaching, we're not just machines, even though there's a sense like, okay, we're humans, we're to be used for good, and to choose what God intended for us. Like He creates us to exercise, again, this natural law. Yeah, so moral conscience, I think in the Catechism says, do what is good, avoid evil, is the very expression of that. So, and then conscience actually equals judgment of practical reason that recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act. So it's also important to know, yeah, we form our conscience in our minds, as I'll tease out in a moment, but it's not like the good devil on your shoulder telling you to do something, or like the good angel or the bad devil on your other shoulder telling you to do either, or kind of like a voice in our head. Our conscience is exhibited and displayed when we make moral decisions, whether to know something's bad and to let it happen. That could be, even though we didn't necessarily maybe do something about it, that's one exercising their conscience. That the Nazi officers told me to do it, I did it, or I knew it was wrong, but chose not to do anything. Even in the non-exercising of what should have been done good, you're actually exercising your conscience by even doing or not doing something. To how to form our conscience, we call it requirements. So interiority, that would be taking a tough decision to prayer and meditation. Uprightness of the moral conscience, that means forming conscience, exercising prudent judgment, and exercising the conscience. Responsibility for the acts performed, so whether you choose to do A or not do A, you're at least willing to suffer consequences that might be coming legally. Certainly the guilt that racks the spirituality, that's a sign that you formed conscience. Even if you don't choose the good, if there's still guilt there, you're willing to suffer the legal consequences too. At least one's exercise their conscience. And a right to act So we should act presuming we've formed our conscience well, which should align with what the church objectively teaches. We really have an obligation to act according to our conscience. Again, teasing us out even more, we inform that conscience by certainly the Word of God, the Scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, kind of the meditations on the law as well. I always like to, before I go to confession, be like, okay, you look at the cross, like how have I been to other people overbearing or judgmental or too brutal and efficient with coworkers? How have I kind of put them on the cross, especially if they wasn't justified or they didn't deserve it? That's a good way to inform. I think the most mature way to maybe form your conscience in terms of asking forgiveness by the Lord. Certainly we're aided by the lives of the saints. I think St. Francis de Sales gave us good advice. I'll actually probably close with him as well. Spiritual direction helps. I have a spiritual director who's works downtown. He's kind of a big wigs downtown. I have a confessor I usually try to go to at the cathedral. Someone that I'm familiar with. We'll talk about that a little bit when we do a mock confession. And of course, to be guided, to be conformed to the church teaching. I think a lot of us know what the church teaches on X, Y, Z, A through Z. It's important, though, if you struggle with something, maybe explore the why of it, where you wouldn't get that on headlines in the New York Times or what have you, CNN. Yeah, they might express what the church teaches. They might even disagree with that, but they will almost never illustrate or articulate the why of it.